Southern, can you give me well, she just disappeared. So it's like disappearing you guys again. Um, Southern, I'm going to throw you the mic for just a second. Um, did it kick you out of the space, Southern?
Yes.
Okay. Could you hear
I thought you kicked me out.
No. Could you? I don't ever kick anybody out unless
I'm
I
kidding.
actually, yeah.
I'm kidding.
No, I have kicked people out, by the way. People
Oh, yeah?
that,
All right.
oh yeah,
I love
people
it.
that are assholes. You are not, you don't fit in that category. Could you hear me okay when you were down there?
Hear you fine.
Okay. All right. So it's already kicked me out 3 times. So that's more than normal. Normally it's only 1 or 2. So I'm going to, until at least Bridget gets in here so I can put her as co-host, keep you on a speaker to make sure that, because I've noticed it's kicking other people out too that has come in. So obviously I already went live over here in Rumble. So if you guys have any problems here, you can always go over to the Rumble live stream and listen to it there and be in the chat over there. I've done everything that people suggest as far as changing settings on my phone, contacting different offices at X, letting them know. It just doesn't like the fact that we're talking about this. So whatever. We're not going to stop talking. So today's been a crazy, crazy day. Just so that you guys know, there seems to be, because of you and you guys reposting all of the stuff all the time, there does seem to be, at least unofficially through the back door, a lot more people seeing our information. And so you guys need to pat yourself on the backs for that, because you are definitely doing the heavy lifting all over. And I see you guys do it because you tag me in it, and I love that you do. So that they at least know who you're talking about. There have been a couple of people that have noticed. So today, and SR71, you'll have to remind me once we get done with the first hour lesson to say this again when everybody is in here. I don't know when he does his shows, but first thing this morning, one of my friends sent me the clip of my reply to the Data Republican, where I said she had noticed, she was talking about the people that had went over to Ukraine. And I made the comment that that list of people looked a lot like the people that were on the take from the NED through the DNI and our IRI, the International Republican Institute, that we've been all over for over a year. And so X22, who does that daily video, took a screenshot of my comment and put it into his show. And so there's like probably 10 different people that texted that to me today. And obviously that's not the first time that he has taken material that we've published. So it's actually happened. It happened at least 2 or 3 times over when we were just on True Social, and it's happened here 2 or 3 times as well. So of course, Bridget, she jumps on that and she immediately reaches out to him. However she did it, I don't know. And suggested that we go on his show. So I know he does long interviews occasionally. So that would be really cool. But again, I really don't have any faith even on the people that are on our side, wanting to touch this. It's weird. All right, Bridget said she's here, so let me put her up there. All right, where is JJ Carroll's channel? So JJ Carroll's channel he has an X account. I don't know, honestly, if he will put that out on, he has his own website. So I don't know if he just releases it on his website and announces it on X or whatever, but it will be on Thursday. He is going to release some shorts between now and then, little video clips of the long interview. So it's not going to be published until Thursday. And if you guys will follow him on X, he's going to tag me. So technically you don't have to. If you follow me on X, you're going to see it. Because of course I'll repost it. Elwood C is from Northwest Arizona. Oh, that's beautiful. That's the area. We were in Page, Arizona a couple years ago when we went out there. Love the northern part of Arizona. Not a big fan of Phoenix area. My friend retired in is it Brant? Hold on. It's the barrel racing capital, Brandenburg or something like that. That's on the northwest corner of Phoenix out there. We spent a week. Obviously, it's far enough away from Phoenix proper, but still not a fan. Let's see. Watching your old Gladio videos, YouTube, trying to get caught up between my doctor's appointments. Well, welcome to the show, Justin. All right. SR71 posted JJ's website over on the Rumble channel. And I'm sure you'll put it in the purple pill as well. So we're going to get started. All right. This section of the book, he calls them essays. So we're going to go with his terminology. This essay is called Operation Gladio and Bloodstone. He says, I must digress a moment to consider what is commonly referred to as Operation Gladio. The colony, as far as this researcher can determine, did not have any direct links to Gladio, which is not true. I'm just going to say not true, because they shared all of the same people, which is why I want to get a hold of this guy, because he's really onto something and I want to fill him in. But the degrees of separation were not great. What's more, there was overlap between Gladio and Condor. Yeah, because it's the same program. And the colony participated in Condor. So, I mean, I don't even know how he says there's not connected, because they're connected linear, if no other way. At the onset, I would emphasize that this is an overview of a very in-depth, complex topic. And obviously we know it by heart, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I highlighted several points that I want to convey to you so you know this guy knows, because it's going to matter when we get to the rest of the book. Operation Gladio is commonly used to describe a series of secret armies the military and intelligence services of the US and UK created at the onset of the Cold War throughout Western Europe. And see, it wasn't just the US and the UK, it was all of NATO. Gladio, however, was only the name of the Italian component of the network, but I'm going to use Gladio here because that's how it's referred to throughout the world. Each individual nation had its own code name for its Gladio unit. So Greece used a couple of different terms. They called them counter guerrillas, but they also called them sheepskin. And Turkey also called them counter guerrillas, but they also had another name called gray wolves, and he doesn't know that. So I'm just kind of giving you a feel for what he does know and what he doesn't know compared to what we know. In theory, the secret armies were established to operate so-called stay-behind networks in the event of a Soviet invasion in Western Europe. These networks would strengthen local resistance movements, sabotage supply lines, factories, and presumably carry out black, i.e., assassination and terrorism operations. That was the theory. In actuality, these networks were chiefly used to counter numerically strong communist parties in Western Europe, and to ensure that they were never democratically elected. To accomplish those ends, the secret armies frequently resorted to terrorism, which was then blamed on communists. And in extreme cases, they were used to crush any opposition movement via staged coups. All of this had a destabilizing effect on NATO and all NATO nations alike that hosted these networks, ensuring their continued subservience to the US. Again, a very naive look. It wasn't subservience to the US because we had our own. It is subservience to a new world order. The earliest secret army emerged in Italy almost immediately after World War II ended. A French network dubbed Plan Bleu, BLEU, was launched in 1946. In 1948, a former structure was applied to these efforts via the Clandestine Committee of Western Union, which was the precursor to NATO, in an effort to coordinate operations in Western Europe. After NATO was created, the Clandestine Committee for Western Union transferred over under NATO to create the Clandestine Planning Committee, CPC, and he doesn't mention the fact that there was also an allied clandestine committee, an ACC, which also operated underneath the CPC. So, this is, however, probably an oversimplistic view of the clandestine units. At the top, there was speculation that there was a secret intelligence detachment, or in the case of Italy, what was referred to as SISMI, which was the Secret Service Intelligence and Military Intelligence Apparatus. Their policy was to select pro-Atlantic, meaning NATO, politicians and officials, and that they would infiltrate the regular military and carabinieri units with a form of stay-behind or rapid response units. But technically, that's not true, because the stay-behind units were strictly civilian in nature. They were ran and coordinated by the official military and intelligence services. Finally, a third level happened with the actual Gladio units that were civilian and specially trained. And there technically was not, in Gladio itself, what they would refer to as the official military structure, that they refer to as special forces, and not Gladio in nature. The whole nature of Gladio was the werewolf units that were civilians with their own dedicated cache of weapons. And that's a big difference, because the official sanction of military operating inside of a country has its own dynamic. But for them to recruit and train civilians to be terrorists against their fellow countrymen is something of a completely different nature and treasonous. You can actually make an argument that if you're using official intelligence forces and carrying out what they're going to argue is counterinsurgency because of the quote unquote communist threat, you can actually make a legal argument that that's fine to do. You might not like it, and it's all bullshit, but you can make that argument. You cannot make any argument of a government training civilians to terrorize their neighbors. There's no justification for that. And that's why I'm very picky about the definitions and the associations that they use. One's 1000% illegal. The other one, you could probably make an argument either way. So he also talks about there being parallel clandestine networks active, known as ANELLO, ANELLO, which translates to ring or link. Those, another name that he came across was a thing called the known, KNOWN, service. This is a civilian network comprised of ex-military, i.e. fascist Republic Mussolini types from as early as 1943. And what he's referring to here is the old stay behind units that was implemented just before the end of the war. Because I don't know that he knows, and I don't remember, I read this like last week, because I don't think he makes, although he knows Otto Skorzeny and Reinhard Galen's involved in this, because we've already covered that. I don't think he makes the distinction that they're still basically running the whole thing. So the fact that there were previous stay behind units that were created during the war, he basically is trying to say that that's kind of a separate thing when in fact it's not. He also says that elements of Anello intersected with all three levels of the Gladio structure. Naturally, it would seem that Anello was the one tapped for many of the terror-related operations attributed to Gladio. But in fact, it was Gladio. The British Special Operations Executive, SOE, was tasked with waging secret wars behind enemy lines during World War II. And we've covered them. They were called Jedburghs. During the war, the SOE had created an extensive underground network throughout Europe. After the SOE had been disbanded in 1946, some of those networks were transferred over to MI6, becoming Operation Gladio as well. It is also highly probable that some of the SOE assets from that network had been transferred to the British American Canadian Corporation, that one we talked about that eventually merges with the World Commerce Corporation under Wild Bill Donovan. When the British began to formally participate in Gladio, the man tapped to oversee the entire thing was Major General Sir Colin Gubbins, Gubbins. Gubbins had operational command of the SOE. He was basically like Donovan's counterpart. Maybe even to say he was more like Dulles' counterpart. So you've got basically Dulles running Gladio for all intents and purposes, and Gubbins would have been his counterpart. So, they're kind of coordinating all of this. On the American side, we obviously were introduced in this book right now to the Office of Policy Coordination, OPC, which is where we found Frank Wisner, who of course moves over to the CIA to run the clandestine covert operations, because technically the OPC transfers in its whole entirety into the CIA and then gets melded into the operational branch of the CIA. It also largely consisted of OSS veterans when it was initially launched from 1948 until 1952. And that's when it was kind of operating out of the State Department, and then it basically folds into the CIA. And that was under CIA Director Walter Bedell Smith, who, of course, we've linked to the drug trafficking out of the Golden Triangle and several other Operation Gladio peripheral activities. As far as Gladio is concerned, the chief architect at OPC was Frank Wisner, and his British counterpart, Sir Colin Gubbins. They basically maintained the already existing Gladio networks, and Wisner was also the leading figure behind an operation of that era called Bloodstone. Initially, Operation Bloodstone sought to recruit Nazi collaborators mainly Eastern European immigrants. And remember, this is where we came across the World Anti-Communist League, because that's what they're doing. And they find them all. Soon, it had much of the ambitious and sinister designs of the previous Nazi regime. Both the OPC and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff sought to organize the collaborators for covert war, sabotage, and assassination operations. The origins of this design go back to 1947, when the U.S. was developing plans for nuclear war with the Soviet Union. These immigrant groups would work in conjunction with U.S. and British special forces to launch a guerrilla war inside of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe in the wake of a nuclear exchange. These units would help establish, quote unquote, anti-communist leadership, capture strategic sections, and choke off any of the remaining communist resistance. Bloodstone then was essentially an offensive version of Gladio, with secret armies being used to invade the Soviet Union rather than carry out stay-behind operations. There are indications, however, that there was some degree of overlap. There was a lot of overlap, actually, and that the Gladio network, in the absence of a Soviet threat, were used to assassinate and create terrorism and sabotage, primarily domestic. In the interesting aspect, several of the immigrant groups recruited by Bloodstone were notably Ukrainian. They had received training from Otto Skorzeny during the war and tasked with training stay-behind formations of the Ukrainian underground to harass the Soviet army on the Eastern Front. As was noted above, Skorzeny appears to have become involved in the World Commerce Corporation network, as well as SOF Indus and various SOE and OSS veterans. Effectively, the World Commerce Corporation brought together virtually all of the SOF, the Special Operation Forces, of the US, UK, and Nazi Germany. These networks were recruited into Gladio and Bloodstone. Then we come across the infamous The Circle. In French, it's called Le Cercle, which maintained extensive contacts with the various Gladio networks for decades. A thorough examination is bigger than this book, but he provides two examples of their interaction and overlap. The first one was Opus Dei. The Opus Dei people had assisted the CIA in setting up Gladio networks throughout Europe, even in those nations that were not Catholic. Because remember, this is a class, some people refer to it as a cult, but it is definitely associated with the Catholic Church, which is interesting because we know that all of these people worked exclusively with the Catholic Church to create the rat lines, money launder. So there seems to be extensive ties. And we've come across Opus Dei before. We've covered it. The second comes from the Academy European Science Politics, AESP, which was located in Brussels and basically was a subsidiary of the Circle. It is also referred to as the Academy, which we talked about yesterday. So you have the Le Cercle and a subordinate organization that we're going to refer to as the Academy. The Academy was established in 1969 by a guy by the name of Florimon Damon, Damman, which is weird because that would be almost immediately after NATO got kicked out of France and Lyman Lemonsker had to move it to Belgium. So they set up in Belgium, co-located with NATO, a thing called the Academy. I'm sure that's another one of those coincidences. Initially, the Academy was intended a kind of clearinghouse for the work to be done by Gladio units and coordinating policy. So it's functioning much like the ACC. It'd be interesting to find an address for them because we found the address for the ACC and CPC because it was located right outside the gate to NATO. So they could say it's not officially part of NATO. Shortly after the Academy's founding, Damon encountered the man called Jean, Jean, Violet, however you say it, Violet. He was instrumental in the circle for decades. Violet had been looking for a group that would provide an operational framework for the operation he envisioned for the circle to participate in, basically one world government. He appears to have settled on the Academy and the UK-based Institution of Study of Conflict, ICSC. What? Wait a minute. So the UK set up a group called the Institute for the Study of Conflict while also sponsoring the Strategy of Tension, which uses conflict to create the tension. Y'all following along? Okay. So not long after Violet became involved in the Academy, the ISC founder and future Circle chairman and president, Brian Crozier, the guy we keep running across, Crozier. So he joins the effort. From the beginning, Violet seems to have conceived of the Academy as a kind of meeting group for the elite institutions, such as the Circle and the Bilderbergs. As for the Circle and Bilderberg's co-founder, Panay, was also involved in the Academy. Another AESP, which is the Academy, Frenchman, was André Voisin, Voisin, who also was a co-founder of the Bilderbergs. A prominent Belgian member, Baron Benoit de Beauvoisin, was the son of the Bilderbergs' co-founder. Beauvoisin would go on to become one of the most notorious members of the Circle complex ever. Other Circle members and also Opus Dei members was Otto von Habsburg, and Alfredo Sanchez Bella would also be affiliated with the Academy for years. The individuals all listed above are linked to the strategy of tension. No shit, they created it. And would spur a wave of terrorism that ravaged Europe for at least 20 years, if not longer. Within the several months of the founding of the Academy, Damon had made contact with individuals sometimes referred to as God's terrorist. This would be the infamous figure sometimes known as Yves Gattazin-Sirac. Now, Yves Gattazin-Sirac is the guy that created Agenter Press and the entire Gladio network in Portugal. Now, he has a different name. His actual real name is Yves Felix Marie Guillot, Guillou. He refers to him as Guillot. I'm going to refer to him as Yves Gattazin-Sirac because that is the name throughout all of Gladio material that this guy's referred to as, and he's flipping all over the place. He is probably secondary to Otto Skorzeny as far as the worker level, like at the operational level, not the tactical level of the trigger pullers. He's probably in the top 3. And I would put him at number 2, only secondary to Otto Skorzeny as far as the operational importance to this network. He is a big, big deal. French paratrooper Yves Gattazin-Sirac was a specialist in unconventional warfare and participated not only in the French war in Vietnam, where he was attached as a French liaison to the CIA. He was also in the Korean War, which is very interesting because that was basically led by the US, even though it was quote unquote a UN. So he somehow manages to make the cut of the very few other people that showed up in Korea. He also was a star of the Otto Skorzeny choreographed civil war in Algeria. So that's very important. During the Algerian Civil War, he served on the 11th Deme Brigade of parachutists, and they referred to that as the shock troop. It's spelled CHOC, but pronounced shock, the 11th Shock Parachute Brigade. The 11th Shock was a paramilitary arm of the SDECE, excuse me, which is the French military, civilian intelligence service, much like the CIA. And it just so happens that the SDECE was an early backer of the Circle and the Academy. Jean Vallée was a long-time asset of SDECE. So basically, he's a CIA asset, only the French version. He had been modeled, it had been modeled off of the British Special Air Services, making it basically a special operations unit. It was infamous worldwide because it was used all over for torture and terrorist acts. They actually, most people accredit them with creating waterboarding because it was used extensively during the Algerian War against Muslim minorities. Well, majority. They were minority in the government, but they were the majority of the people in Algeria. Naturally, elements of the 11th Shock also participated in the 1961 coup against Charles de Gaulle, which was done as an attempt to halt Charles de Gaulle and JFK's support of the independence effort of Algeria, because the French military and the French elite, and, you know, of course, all of these intelligence people work for the businesses who had vested interest in Algeria did not want Algeria to have their independence. And they're the ones that are sponsoring all of this violence, torture, and everything else. And Charles de Gaulle was very much on the side of granting Algeria their independence, so they tried to kill him. The coup was led by a clandestine network of French military known as the OAS, and the OAS coup failed. So Yves Sauvage deserted the 11th Shock Brigade and signed on with the OAS because the OAS basically got outlawed in France after trying to kill the president. So this is all really important because I want to make mention of something. This is going on from throughout basically all of the early 60s into like the mid to late 60s in Algeria. How many by hands have listened to the latest segment of Candace Owens that she just released on the French president and his husband? By hands. Anybody listen? SR71, Bridget's listened to it. I don't see anybody else raising their hand. They make mention of the guy in the story having performed his mandatory military service. And he supposedly performed his mandatory military service in 1963 in Algeria. What that tells you is that that guy was part of the special operation i.e. Gladio, because do you know who orchestrated all of that? Otto Skorzeny. Otto Skorzeny was the planner for the military operations, both covertly and overtly in Algeria for France using the OAS. Now, another reason why that's really, really important is because 1963 obviously is the year JFK was killed. And also, OAS is the organization that had at least 2, some accounts say 4, OAS assassins in Dallas, Texas that day. Now, that's very interesting, especially in light of what just came out on that other memo about the fact that there were potentially other Mossad IDF people that had accompanied the IDF chief or deputy chief, into El Paso to go to Fort Bliss, which puts them, obviously not next door. And there was not anyone who's like, oh yeah, there was Hebrew speaking people, along the parade route. We don't have that kind of cooperation. So it's all very interesting. We do have cooperation and witnesses that say 2 of the people spoke French. The one cop actually submitted an affidavit saying that he was directed to take one of them to the Mexican border. There are also affidavits of one of them leaving by air. Now, some people's accounts say there were 2 other OAS agents in that same plane. The bottom line, everybody in that plane ends up dead. The one and the pilot ends up dead. And then the account that said there were 3 OAS agents say basically they were all taken out within about 72 hours of the event. So take that for whatever it's worth. Obviously, there's different, and people have witness statements of people saying these things happened. They're just different. So I want to give you the whole picture of everything that I've read. It's just a very interesting time frame, and I want to put all of that in context because I know it's hard to keep track of all of it. All right. So after the OAS was defeated and expelled from France, they weren't actually defeated. They were just expelled because they stayed in existence for quite a while after that. You have Surratt relocated to Portugal, which is where he set up a Genter press. And keep in mind, Portugal at the time was under the dictatorship of Antonio Salazar. So, again, Surratt's referred to as God's terrorist, now intended or declared, probably would be the better word, to carry out his quote unquote anti-communist struggle, which read that as fascist. To this end, in 1966, he founded the Genter Press, which functioned as a news bureau at the same time, was used as a press, which forged documents necessary for the movement of all of the NATO Otto Skorzeny network, Operation Gladio people, creating false passports, false IDs, and all kinds of different things. Okay, so it says he was involved from that vantage point in espionage. It was tasked with recruiting and training mercenaries and terrorists and training them in the techniques of sabotage and assassination, subversion, and regime change, and just basically how to function as a secret army, which basically is the same thing that Otto Skorzeny was doing. And he actually did work under the direction of Otto Skorzeny. Genter had extensive intelligence contacts to include inside of Portugal in an organization there called the PIDE, and that basically was their CIA. They coordinated with West Germans BND, even though they were a dictatorship, And they also worked intimately with South Africa's BOSS because all of them functioned as part of the Galen Gladio network. Its forces included many former OAS veterans and Italians who basically had got caught doing something or was under indictment in Italy. They would run over to Spain and or Portugal in order to hide out. There was also a few Americans associated with this unit, primarily Cuban exiles. It was, they also had Nazis among their ranks. Genter's International Paramilitary Force was referred to as OACI and was co-founded by none other than Otto Skorzeny. During the span of 10 years, Genter left a shocking amount of dead bodies. In addition to aiding Portugal in its colonial wars, which we covered many of them, Genter Press became an effective node in the Gladio network. Genter agents would also be used to commit acts of terrorism linked to Gladio throughout Europe. Genter assets in Italy was used in the Piazza Fontana massacre. Many consider that to be the opening salvo of the Years of Lead campaign throughout Italy. Even more ominous was the use of Genter assets in the Guatemalan counterterrorism operation undertaken by the CIA and the SOF units that left 50,000 people dead from the years 1968 to 1971. Naturally, Genter assets would turn up in Chile in the coup in 1973 as well. After Genter Press was shut down in 1974 by Portuguese authorities, following a coup that toppled the fascist dictator, many of the assets moved to South America and into Chile. Seurat was one of the most prolific terrorists of the Gladio network. His Genter Press also appeared to have been a key node, not just in Gladio, but also in Condor. Now, the guy traces the same people in both networks, but then says he can't prove that they're connected, which is just a little weird. Florimond Damon, who was a close associate of several La Circle founding members, was meeting with Seurat in 1969, shortly after he launched the Academy, which tells you the Academy is linked to Gladio. Beyond Genter Press, the Academy would also be linked to another infamous organization, part of Gladio, and that is the P2 Masonic Lodge, or propaganda duo. P2 was one of the clandestine Masonic lodges to spread across Western Europe. The propaganda lodges included France's P1, Spain's P3, and for other purposes, there was an alleged P7 in Belgium, all collaborating with each other. P2 was said to have constituted a shadow government in the Italian state. When a partial membership was exposed in 1981, it included 52 officers of the Carabinieri, which is basically their national police, 79 members of the military, 70 members of wealthy industrialists, 10 bank presidents, 38 members of Congress, and 14 judges. Now, I would imagine that you could probably, here's the equivalent of the United States. It would be like saying 52 officers in the FBI, 79 people in the military, 70 people of the international U.S. syndicate, 10 of the major bank presidents, and 38 congressional members with 14, like DC judges. And you can see how you would have to have that network in each country in order to be able to orchestrate the things that they did and then cover them up. So I don't think this is at all atypical. It's just the only one that got exposed to the extent that it did. This same network was everywhere, guys. Every NATO country, every NATO aligned country had to have this set up. So, a future prime minister from Italy, Silvio Berlusconi, who had wielded enormous power in Italy for decades, was among those on the list. The venerable Grand Master P2 was Lucio Galli, who just so happens to be a black shirt, part of Mussolini's hit squad, and an SS man himself. Galli was able to wield such influence over the Italian state because he had compromising files on everyone. General Giovanni Alavina, was part of the network. Alavino was a former director of basically the CIA in Italy called the SID. And when he joined the P2, he gave the lodge a special gift of 157,000 secret files on everybody in Italy. He basically was kind of like the Epstein of Italy. He had compromised a lot of people and turned over that compromising material to basically the CIA and the Masonic Lodge. There was actually two different files. His collection of files, so part of their initiation into the lodge there was they had to give them, the lodge, any compromising material they had on other people, as well as something compromising about themselves that could be used to coerce them to stay into the lodge. And if it wasn't compromising enough, they couldn't get in. And by the way, this is exactly what the rumors are of the initiation ceremony of Skull and Bones. This is exactly the same methodology that people, now obviously this is speculation of like things that people have said, and it's been repeated because there's no official initiation material that I'm aware of. But that is how they get people into that club, and then they never leave, is because they have compromising material on them, either from their past or they actually compromise them as part of the initiation ceremony, and then they have them for life. So I found it odd that that is an exact same kind of scenario that they were using to initiate people into the P2 Lodge. Okay. Unsurprisingly, P2 had been linked to all of the terrorism during the years of lead in Italy. Two of the most notable instances was the 1974 Italicus Express bombing that killed 12 and the 1980 Bologna massacre that left 85 dead. Reportedly, there was close cooperation between the secret government of P2 and the secret army of Gladio throughout this time frame. P2 was also implicated in the Vatican banking scandal thanks to the presence of two financiers that also happened to be two P2 Lodge members, Michele Sedona and Roberta Calvi. Roberta Calvi, of course, was God's banker, while Savak was God's terrorist. Finally, P2 was linked to the kidnapping and assassination of Aldo Moro. They also, P2 and the people associated with P2, crops up throughout Operation Condor in Latin America to include a major, like their second largest office was in Argentina. The Academy had one direct link to P2, and that was Giancarlo Illia Valori, Valori, who became a member of the Academy's permanent delegation in 1977. He had dealings as early as 1972, but shows up on an official roster in 1977. The Academy members involved were part of the Belgium's P7, which is their lodge of basically the P2 propaganda lodge. P7 was allegedly a conduit for which all of the CIA funds were channeled throughout the different networks in Gladio throughout Europe, which kind of makes sense if you think about that. Now, this is the first time I've read this, but it's also the first time I've read that there were other, not that there wasn't other propaganda duo lodges, but they actually had a different number. Like P2 was Italy, then P7 is Belgium. I've never seen that part of the equation. And then the ferreting of money being through the lodge, which makes perfect sense because Roberto Calvi is one of the major conduits of money laundering with Archbishop Marcinkus, who came out of the Chicago Archbishop diocese and was also banking with the mafia there while he was in Chicago. And so he gets tapped to do the money laundering at later on, not at the very beginning. But during the time when the big scandal happened, he was the in charge of the Vatican Bank. And so they're money laundering all of the drug money and weapons money. So it makes perfect sense because they're all members of the P2. Most of them are members of the Knights of Malta as well. So it does make sense that they would use that secret network to use as a funds conduit. So 3 early and longstanding members of the Academy was involved in all of this. Italian Ivan Matteo Lombardo. The Belgium counterpart was Vittorio Pons, Pons, and the Hungarian Ernest Tutosi, Tottosy. He was a member of the P7, the Belgium version of that. So another link between P2 and the Circle complex comes in the form of a longtime Italian prime minister who is our buddy, Andreotti. He's the one that spills the beans eventually in 1990. Andreotti was said to have been the actual puppet master behind P2. Curiously, Andreotti was a member of the Knights of Malta, as was Gelli and Umberto Ortolani, a former Italian intelligence officer, but very high up in the P2 lodge. And just so that you know how bastardized this whole thing was, the Knights of Malta is supposedly a Catholic order. Gelli is an atheist, and he still got in. P2 members who also belonged to the Knights of Malta was General Giovanni Alavino, who provided Gelli with his cachet of compromising documents, Admiral Giovanni Torinzi, General Giulio Grassini, General Giuseppe Santavito. He's very well known in this Gladio network. His name came up a lot originally. Another prominent P2 member was Roberto Calvi. He also was rumored to be in the Opus Dei. And P2 seems to clearly have been interacting with the Circle complex. Finally, there was the Belgium Academy members to what was referred to as the Bloody 80s. That was Belgium's own Years of Lead, which we've covered. And that was the series of like grocery shop assassinations of women and children called the Brabant massacres. They primarily happened between 82 and 85. There were 16 attacks. They left 28 people dead and the nation permanently traumatized. While it was often in the media described as robberies, they didn't take anything. They didn't take people off dead. They didn't take shit off the dead bodies. They didn't take cash out of the cash registers. Hardly ever. I think one time they did. They were not robberies. They were assassinations. They were terror events orchestrated by Operation Gladio troops by the Belgian government. They chose crowded public spots, primarily grocery stores, and primarily women and children as their targets. As of the 2019, no one had ever been prosecuted for the murders, and likely no one ever will since the statute of limitations ran out in 2015. Over the years, compelling evidence emerged that the killings were carried out by fascist military known as Westland New Post. The Westland New Post was created and headed by Paul Latinus, Latinus. Latinus was a former nuclear science technician and member for the Sarate, which is the intelligence service. So basically, he was an informant, always known to the intelligence people. By the late 1970s, Latinus had worked for the Belgian government as an assistant advisor in the labor ministry and a counselor to several committees. He had also been an asset for our US DIA and the Pentagon's leading intelligence, which is the Pentagon's leading intelligence service, and his first known association with DIA was 1967. He was recruited to work with them, which again, dates matter. 1967 is when they moved NATO's headquarters over to Belgium. And so they are obviously going to want people in the local area to get the lay of the land and as informants for the neighborhood in Belgium. Latimus would briefly flee Belgium in 1981 after his affiliation with Gladio had been exposed. Latimus fled to where? Chile. What? Why would he go to Chile? Like Pinochet? Yeah, that's where he went. He went back after 2 months to Belgium, and almost immediately after he returned, the Brabant killings began. So did he go to the colony for terrorist training and sniper shooting training? 2 months? I'm going to say he went to Chile to the colony. That's complete speculation. But this is not unusual in this storyline. The Westland New Post had its origins in a host of fascist organizations established in Belgium during the 1970s. The author focuses on direct links to the Circle and the Academy, one of the earliest and most significant of the quasi-official organizations known as the Public Information Office. The Public Information Office, and again, this is in Belgium, was established in 1974, and it was part of the Belgian Army General Staff. It was supposedly an autonomous group. Officially, the PIO, Public Information Office, had two objectives: to expose Soviet disinformation in the media and to serve as a clearinghouse for information on subversion. In other words, this was the government of Belgium spying on its own people and managing the media. Unofficially, it was used to mount an aggressive counterintelligence targeting anyone that they believed did not have mainstream ideas and bore a lot of resemblance to the FBI's Intel Pro. Latinus was recruited to work for them. So the PIO was headed by a Major Jean-Marie Bouguereau, Bougerol. During the mid-late 1970s, when the PIO was at its peak, he was in regular contact with both the Academy and the Circle. The PIO had been set up to watch Belgium's Defense Minister Paul van den Boyens, who was often referred to in the Belgian press as questionable, a longtime contact of both the Academy and the Circle. Another key Academy and Circle figure linked to the PIO was the above-mentioned Baron Benoit de Bosvoisen. the son of the co-founder of the Bilderberg Group. De von Boysen was at times known as the Black Baron, provided key logistics support and funding for all of these operations. The organization that directly spawned the WNP is a curious entity called the FJ. It was referred to as the Front of Jeunesse. The FJ was founded in 1974, and 5 years later, the WNP had been formed within it as an action arm. The FJ had done its part to pave the way and offered paramilitary training to its members throughout the 1970s. Paul Latinus had been a leading member of both organizations. Funding for the FJ came from the Black Baron and a guy by the name of Paul Vankerhoven, Vankerhoben, who also was affiliated with the Academy. There was indications that the funds that VDB provided funds for the FJ. This is during the same time frame that Black Baron was working closely with the PIO, which Latimus had allegedly recruited into in 1977. So basically, what the author is doing is associating the circle in a whole confusing way with using all of those acronyms. He's basically saying that in Belgium, there's a Gladio operation that was responsible for the Brabant grocery store massacres that extended over several years, devastated Belgium. They supposedly couldn't find out who was doing it, didn't know anything about it. No one, like it said, was ever held accountable. And it went on literally for years. And I don't know if you guys were around when the shooter was in DC, like shooting people at gas stations. That lasted a very short period of time and traumatized so many people. This went on for years with women and children as targets. The effect on Belgium cannot even be described. And it was on purpose because there was people in Belgium at the time that did not want NATO there. Because as soon as NATO got moved there in the late 1960s, all the debauchery that had been going on in Paris followed it. You've got Marc Dutroux and the pedophilia scandal. There's dead little kids showing up. Kids are being kidnapped. And the people in Belgium started standing up and didn't want that shit in Belgium. So this is what they did to them. To shut them up. So that's where we're going to stop for today. It's kind of a logical stopping point. And we will start part 6 tomorrow. All right, what you guys got for me? What's this?
Hello, can I get in there?
Sure.
Okay. We're talking about the global crime syndicate that's running the world. Can we talk about how these guys party? Because they are criminals and they are fun-loving criminals and they like to party. Because they are essentially hedonistic nihilists. I mean, they may claim to be Satanists or whatever. I think that's just a front. You know, they don't really believe in it. They're basically atheists at heart. And they're nihilistic hedonists. So when they socialize and they get together and they party, it's like one big event that goes on. And it's at the high level, it's associated with major global events because they're globalists and they control the planet. So something like the World Cup final, you know, all these guys fly in on their private jets. And the whole thing is organized. There's a big party. There's a cocaine and hookers party over here. And there's another party over here where you can chill out. And there's another party over here where you can do this and do that. And it's all organized. And at the heart of it is human sacrifice, because that's what they like. and somebody's going to get popped in these parties. And this happens at lower levels of crime also, because they're crime syndicate. I know people who are involved in the crime gangs in London, and they say this is what happens. Like, they organise these events, and at some point in the event, the climax of the event, it's all about the climax, maximising your pleasure. Somebody's going to get hit. If there's a human sacrifice, and if you want to progress in the rap world, the drill music world, or whatever, you have to engage in this process in these parties, and you have to, kill somebody to get ahead. What are your thoughts?
Well, you're saying that as if it's fact, and then you're asking me my thoughts on it. There are documented instances of children's dead bodies found on the premises of Marc Dutrox's properties in Belgium. It is a fact that children die in the presence of these people, because Marc Dutrox more than illustrated that. So I don't know how widespread it is, but it's unequivocally true that happens. And like I said, he's in jail for the rest of his life as a result of, finally. And if you guys read the Marc Dutrox story, it's dumbfoundingly awful. People knew that he was not outside of town. He had cemented up little kids in his walls in the basement. There were government officials that came looking, that they say there's no way you could not have heard those kids. And they walked right out and left them kids there. So yes, it does happen. One of the things that, when I was investigating the whole move to Belgium from Paris of NATO, and the fact that when I first discovered this Marc Dutrox network, I'd never even heard of him. And basically the allegation is that they use them to compromise people that come to NATO for conferences. And obviously that's major. Generally the high-ranking military officers, which then they use to, either look the other way when they're stealing weapons, in weapons shipments to places like Afghanistan and Ukraine and stuff like that. But it very much sounded, minus the dead kids, like the operation that we discovered in conjunction with Nugent Hand Bank down in Australia. So they had an entire network set up of hotels with hookers and casinos, and everything was wired to record everything. And all of the Vietnam military did their R&R in this hotel, casino, and restaurant, all of which was rigged with video equipment. And so obviously we cycled quite a few of our senior military through Vietnam that would have then gone to Australia for their R&R week or two, like a week every 6 months, I think is what it was. And now forever, they've got compromising material on them. So this is a fact that this happens. And it is a fact that they use children. It was also, although it was never part of his trial, in the case of Marc Dutrox, people, because they were never asked at trial, it was not ever put on the record of the trial itself that I could find. But the same people that testified in his trial said that he arranged hunts where they would hunt children with dogs and other types of animals in the woods in Belgium. It's a horrific story. So there's no doubt that happens. There's obviously networks that have been discovered. We talked about some of them in England. but not the ones that involved. I've not. I mean, we know people like Mountbatten and Jimmy Savile and all of those people were involved with children, but I've not seen that connected to, like, obviously a lot of business people go to London and then they have all of those parties like we talked about earlier in this book. So um, anyway, that's enough about that. Bridget, did you have anything you wanted to add? Go ahead, SR71. I don't know if Bridget can't talk.
I did notice one thing here when you were talking about Jean Violet.
Uh-huh.
He's a double dipper, by the way. He was part of Opus Dei as well.
He was part of what?
Opus Duo or whatever it is.
Opus Dei. Opus Dei.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was a member of both of them.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a very special person.
And you also asked me to remind you about a reply to Datacom, your daily video, X22 daily video.
Oh, I just wanted to let everybody in here know that early this morning I was notified that Data Republican had posted something yesterday that I replied to that had listed all of the names of the people that went over to Ukraine, and I made the comment that it looked exactly like the list of the NDI and the IRI part of National Endowment for Democracy, because it kind of did. And he put that up in his video yesterday as part of his show. So Bridget reached out to him and suggested to him that he do a long form interview with the material that we've accumulated as part of Operation Gladio. So we'll see if that leads to anything. It isn't the first time that people that I know has suggested to him that he have me on his program. I know 2 other people that has done that, but apparently he's not interested in the topic. So.
Yeah, they like the party in the Vatican as well. There are a lot of very handsome priests in the Vatican, so I hear.
Okay. Yeah, I've not read anything about that. I mean, obviously, we know there's bad things that happen in the Catholic Church with some priests. But anyway, we try to stick to things that we can actually prove. We've already covered the Marc Dutroux. We covered Mountbatten really early on during the time that he was over in India. A lot of documentation of him being very close to young boys during the time that he was in India. So he also was in, let's see, he was in this, I want to say, was it Malaysia or the southern part of Vietnam in the immediate aftermath of World War II? One of those 2 places. Yeah, he definitely was a prolific traveler. So anyway, Southern, did you have anything?
I was just reading about this Marc Dutroux. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's awful.
Oh my God. And his wife.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. He's and that's what I say. People here talk about Jeffrey Epstein like it's the end all be all. Jeffrey Epstein is like a choir boy compared to Marc Dutroux.
Yes.
And nobody here has ever heard of him.
And what's stunning is the police, what they call the police in Brussels, actually heard the girl screaming.
Yes.
Kept walking.
Yes.
They just walked away.
That's what I said. They were in the basement, cemented into walls.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. We've covered it. I wrote a whole thing about it. It's the most disgusting thing I've ever researched, and no one is interested in it here. They're fixated on Jeffrey Epstein for some fucking reason, and it drives me nuts. But
I'll tell you why. They think it's tagged to people in Congress, Senate, and the big donors. so they could be kind of a cataclysm shift.
But that's garbage. Every single one of those politicians has been to NATO headquarters. Every one of those politicians has been to Brussels. They went to all of those same parties. It's as if whatever they're doing stops at the edge of the United States, and they have no cognizant knowledge of the fact that this network is a worldwide network. It doesn't just operate in the US. And what has been done in our name around the world is 10 times worse than anything they fixate on here. Sorry, but that's a soapbox. That drives me nuts.
I'm the same way, Colonel. I've just learned to step back and go, what is it they care about? And it's disturbing. But what's terrifying is people that are complicit because they didn't say anything. And to me, they're just as bad because these are children. That's a line you can't cross with me. It's children.
Well, that's what I'm saying. All of our congressmen have went to parties at NATO headquarters. All of them. They've all been to NATO. So have our general officers. Anyway, Sunshine, go ahead.
I think these average Americans, they hear the name Epstein over and over and over again. They don't hear the Detroit stories. They don't hear about these other huge, sick pedophiles that have more power than Epstein ever had. And I think that's by design.
I can't disagree with what you're saying. But it seems to me that if you're concerned with, as we hear, and I'm not suggesting they're not concerned with the children, but if you're concerned with the children, you wouldn't just be concerned with the children here, because we don't just operate here. Our government has been everywhere. Our government has destabilized almost every country in the world. And it would just, to me, and again, I'm not normal. I know I've been in the military. I've lived in other countries. It just seems logical to me that if you have it here, you would just do, like when I did a search on baby farms, I didn't find any in the United States. That doesn't mean they don't exist. There's a shit ton of them all over the world. And it didn't stop me because they were in other countries from looking into what they are. And it just so happens that when you do that, you find out that those baby farm countries all have a bioweapons lab in them. And they all have been destabilized by the CIA. And I don't think any of that's a coincidence. So you can't just look at stuff in the United States and be satisfied that you're like revealing something, because this network is a worldwide network. And if we learn nothing else, I hope everybody understands that.
Well, let me ask you this, Colonel, if I may. John Ratcliffe, he has actually said everybody needs to resign from the CIA. Do you think he's going to lock some of this down?
What do you mean by lock it down? I want it locked up.
Break it with a sledgehammer.
I don't know, to be honest with you. It is what I pray for is the CIA to be disbanded. I've made that very clear. I think the first step is the voluntary resignation of everyone. And then I think the next step would be getting a team in there to basically expose anyone complicit in all of this crap that we've uncovered, and basically presenting them, depending on what it is. I mean, if there was no crimes, it was just bad shit, then basically telling them they're not going to get the 8-month extra pay before their retirement is effective. Tell them in the office, I want your resignation on my desk in an hour. And then you start dealing more harshly the higher up the offensive until you get to the real interesting dilemma that you have with the CIA is the whatever the modern day equivalent to the 4512-2 is, because that authorization that was signed by the president, and every one of them has signed something very similar to it, basically gives the CIA, even though the legal opinion in the CIA is it's not worth the paper it's written on, supposedly was the executive approval to commit assassinations. But again, they have had a standing legal opinion since the very first year the CIA was created that says they have no legal standing to perform assassinations. That's unequivocally true. So you have a dilemma where you have something signed by the president telling you you have the ability to execute someone, assassinate them, because you designated them as the infamous terrorist or communist. And as a result of that, what do you do with those people? That's going to be a question that's going to have to be asked. Do you go with the legal opinion that they had no authority to do that, or do you go with the fact that they were directed to do that by the president and they were just carrying out orders? It's an ethical dilemma, and somebody's going to have to deal with that. It's not going to be me, but I'm willing to look at both sides of that because I certainly understand the dilemma because I was faced with it myself, not obviously assassinating someone, but where my boss is telling me to do something that I know unequivocally is not legal to do. And of course, I refuse to do it. I wouldn't do it. I would never do it. Doesn't win you any friends. But anyway, I understand the dilemma. I just want it closed. I want it locked. I want a for sale sign out front. Zama, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. I was curious to get your take on what you thought was the connection between the circle that you've been mentioning a lot in this episode and the Pilgrim Society. It seems to me, as you were, saying that this also, as we can zoom into the details of organizations like Circle, which was also very kind of key in the beginning of the creation of the EU and all of that, right? So you have the EEC, all of these characters, whether it's Binet or Joseph Strauss or von Habsburg, all of these guys were kind of key role players on a more overt level on the kind of post-war European integration, right? And more kind of like French-German rapprochement around the kind of whole sort of Catholic, old sort of Holy Roman Empire alliance and the Vatican, right? So you have all of that kind of Catholic world coming together. And then the Opus Dei connection. But what's curious to me is it seems, especially around the figure of Jean Violet, is you have in the late 60s more the kind of influence and connections to characters who are definitely in the kind of more Anglo-American sphere and sort of Pilgrim Society circles. And so I'm just curious about that and how, obviously these things are a bit more overarching, but we focus down into these one organizations. And I think the connections kind of, the networks go kind of all which ways. And yeah, I'm curious if you've come across that in your reading on this.
I've never compared the two lists. I actually have a list of both, but that's a very interesting question. A very, very interesting question. So I'm going to have to go back and see if I can overlay the two lists to come up with that answer. If I find the answer, I'm going to post it. Because what's interesting about now, obviously, the Pilgrims are U.S. and U.K. They basically set up just like the RIIA and the CFR, but Le Cercle has all kinds of people in it. It is an international, like the Al Fazal, the Prince Turki Al Faisal. There's a lot of Saudi people in Le Cercle. There's all kinds of different countries that were admitted. There's, let's see, this guy's from Iran, Dr. Hushang. Mahdi. He was an Oxford graduate. What you find when you start looking at Le Circle, from my perspective, it's not true of every one of them, but if they are not American or British or like the elite of Europe, if they're one of these other people, they were groomed to be in Le Circle by attending Western University. So they will have graduated from a university in Germany or France or Oxford or Harvard, um, and be of other like Indian or Iranian or Saudi or Jordanian. But you rarely ever find someone. As a matter of fact, I've not seen any. And of course, I've not went through every single one of them, but I don't remember the last time I looked because we did a whole section on Le Circle. I made a bunch of posts about it because I bought a book and the book just blew me away. I had never even heard of it before.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I'd love to. I'll look that up and go through some of your older posts because yeah, it's fascinating. I kind of see a lot of these things a bit like onion layers, right? So you have inner and outer circles in terms of how these kind of the membership, I guess, and who's in and who's out. I'll post an article too that talks about how I think it was specifically. Was it Jean Monnet or Jean Violet, who was key to sign up to recruiting members of British and American as both MI6. And I think at that point, there was a guy called Brian Crozier. And then I think we've talked about Peter Tennant as well, who was chairing circle meetings come the 70s. And so there you have this kind of interestingly suddenly key figures of the sort of Anglo-American world are actually chairing the kind of inner circles of these things. And so, yeah, it's a curious shift. And I wonder I'm always kind of wondering how to frame it or kind of analyze it, whether it's sort of broader alliances. But then the more I look into it, it's also, I see a lot of these power networks really about kind of control of wealth management and their own sort of power circles, right? Whether it's in government or in organizations or in finance. And that's aside from all the darker ops and stuff like that there are associates to in the intelligence services. But yeah. Anyway, I'll post a link on an article I found very interesting about the circle and pilgrim kind of connection.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, those are the things that I was trying to set up a brain map that would have made something like that very easy because you can just put your cursor over like Le Circle, and then you can put your cursor over the Pilgrim Society, and it would, be able to illustrate the overlap, like, in 5 seconds. Obviously, with AI, you could probably do it as well. But yeah.
Totally. And some of these characters were definitely members of both, right? Or at least frequenting.
Absolutely.
Key sort of moments in which both were sort of participating in key events, whether it was like the Algerian War, like you were mentioning, or you see how, I think one of the key overlaps is you have Indochina turn into Vietnam, in which the French were involved there, and you see some of these characters turn up in the OAS, and who then become they're very key members of the circle crowd, which is very interesting, right? And then that becomes a sort of American operation post when we have like sort of around the sort of Kennedy years and then post Kennedy, right? But yeah, very interesting.
Well, and obviously you're going to have an overlap because you have not just like the Pilgrim Society, the CFR, the Bilderbergs, the 1001 Club. We did a whole thing about that. You have the Trilateral. So you're going to see these people, and it would be great to have like a graph that showed all of those, actions. As far as the duplicate people, as far as that goes. Thanks for that. Bridget, go ahead.
Sorry, I am relaying a quick question over from Rumble. I'm going to butcher her Razvedika was saying that for a spell was stationed over at the NATO and actually was asking, I guess this is kind of new information. We get a lot of new people coming in. Anyway, was assigned to U.S. NATO headquarters in 1969, and also said that the chain of command interests me. She says, I want to know how orders went to the stay-behind units in Germany. And because she said that walked past some of the, actually a mine that went off 20 minutes earlier or later, that was left there by the stay-behind units in Germany. So the question, if you can, again, because we got a lot of new people coming in, kind of lay out how the NATO connection to the stay-behind with Gillen and so on.
So basically, the stay-behind units were coordinated, managed, if you will, out of NATO headquarters in an organization called the CPC and the ACC, Clandestine Planning Committee and the Allied Clandestine Committee, those two organizations. That's where they did the majority of their coordination as far as operational goes. Each country set it up somewhat differently, but there were commonalities. The German stay-behinds was managed out of the German equivalent of the CIA, which was the B&D at the time. Reinhard Gehlen was the original coordinator. He was the actual person who set him up in Europe, specifically in Germany during World War II. So how the Nazi guy that was Hitler's Nazi intelligence chief became West German denazified West German's intelligence chief is a little mind-baffling. You got to kind of do some mental gymnastics to figure out how we won the war when the Nazis ended up running NATO and the intelligence apparatus of Germany. But whatever, you're not supposed to notice that. And so they are the ones that coordinate. So any instructions to detonate a mine or an explosive or anything else would have came out of whatever organization. In the case of Germany, it would have been the B&D. And in Italy, the SDECE, or the Agenter Press, and Portugal, the Grey Wolf Network, which was tied into the intelligence, the CIA version of Turkey. Each one of them basically had different names, but the organizational flow generally was they had meetings, at least according to Andreotti, they were like quarterly meetings, planning meetings that basically deconflicted. And then they used like kind of centralized training. So like Sardinia in Italy was one of their training sites. The Canary Islands was a training site. There was a bunch of training schools in Spain as well that Otto Skorzeny ran. So hopefully that answers that. SR 71.
Thank you, Colonel. I'm going to go back to the question of why people focus on Epstein versus Dutroux and what goes on internationally. And I think the issue with this is my personal opinion. I know people in the United States that have never left where they have been born. I mean, they just don't travel. And if it doesn't have anything to do in the U.S., they could care much less. They may hear about it, oh, that's Europe, that's not here. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have in the United States from a population standpoint that says we live in this bubble and nothing else matters. And unfortunately, I can't see it because I'm introduced to the crowd here that no doubt has international connections. I have international connections. I know the Colonel has international connections. We can't dismiss it. And trying to convince the rest of the public that this is something that we should all be worried about, we should all be cognizant about, we should all do something about, just doesn't relate. Thank you, Colonel.
Sure. Carl, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. Hey, everyone. So when you had mentioned Berlusconi before, it made my ears perk up. Now, it's funny when you look at things with the Gladio glasses, because I had known about him and a lot of the stuff, especially Red Brigade, not that he was necessarily tied into that, but just in Italy. And given that he was a media tycoon and he did those Epstein-style parties on Sardinia, and he had that scandal with, I think it was Ruby, was the Moroccan call girl. You know, you look at things a little differently. How much of it was a honeypot? How much of it was him being honeypotted? I just wondered if you have any comment on that.
No, that's an excellent observation. Excellent. Because it is kind of hard to tell unless you do a little bit more digging, right? Because the scandal could have been like a leash. He got a little too, out on a limb, and they honeypotted him, exposed it, and then that brought him back in line. Until you are able to, and thank you for doing that, Carl, because until you're able to understand Gladio, you can't possibly look at any scandal and understand the 10 different angles of which it could be unless you understand Gladio, because Gladio allows you to look at everything differently. So you basically just kind of made my point. You can know any data node in history and think you understand it, that, he's just a sleazeball, and was playing around with hookers. Well, maybe not. Maybe he didn't play around with hookers at all. Maybe he was set up. And that's what Gladio allows you to do. And you can go back now and read court documents and find out. And that's what's happened for me many times. Not like newspaper versions of what happened, but actual court documents. And you find some amazing things, like the one that we just uncovered, where the guy's actually saying from a court case, yeah, I was trained by NATO. What? You were billed as an Islamic terrorist, but he's telling you in court documents he was trained by NATO. So again, you have to look at everything completely different. And that's why I went back and reread books that I read that I thought I understood. I really missed a whole bunch of key points because it wasn't anything that registered to me until I read it with Gladio glasses on.
Different lens. Yeah.
Completely.
Also, a heads up on Licio Gelli's famous list when they revealed who was a member of the famous P2 Lodge. Berlusconi was one of the big names on that.
Yeah.
As well as you well mentioned, 12 generals of the Caribbean.
Hundreds of other,
police,
because I think that
generals and another kind of high
yeah,
officials.
the initial list, once it came out, was like 900 people.
That's right.
Yeah, it was crazy. Joseph, go ahead.
I was just looking up top here at something that Bridget posted of the monster of Belgium, Marc Dutroux. I actually recently watched a documentary about him, and it was very interesting. It put together connections between the CIA and the Church of Scientology. So I kind of wanted to bring that up and see if this was a legitimate, documentary, if there was factual basis behind that, because they said that L. Ron Hubbard had some kind of connection with the CIA because one of his relatives or something, also named Hubbard, was an operative for the OSS before it became the CIA. So I wanted to see if you guys had any knowledge of that.
So, no is the overall answer, but there's different ways to get to L. Ron Hubbard. There's something that we've not completely vetted, and I'm just going to tell you what I'm going to give you a hypothesis based on what we have read. And Bridget's done a lot of this research as well, and I'll let her jump in at the end. Without going into specifics, I'm just going to give you a generic overview. There are elements of a religion in which L. Ron Hubbard is associated. And almost every whacked out religious cult, and not by a scientific definition of a cult, just ones that we would all kind of collectively agree has cult-like aspects to it. Branches of religions that are very common named religions. So I'm not going to necessarily name them because it's like branches of them, sects of them that have been broken off from those churches, all seem to gather around L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. And as a result of that, you get some very weird associations. And the Branch Davidian is one example of that. They were the offshoot of an offshoot, and the what's his face? What's his name, Bridget?
Dave Koresh.
Yes, he made multiple trips a month to Los Angeles, to the San Bernardino area, which is one of the major locations for L. Ron Hubbard's group. And so you begin to start looking at some of these. Jim Jones is the same way. Jim Jones, if you look up the geographical location of his location in Los Angeles, it just so happens to be right next door. Like not literally right next door, but close enough that would make you raise your eyebrows. Now, that becomes important when you're looking overall at how these different events are connected. And there does seem to be a lot of ties back there. And then there's also been associations with the LaVey and some of those other aspects. And then, of course, you get into the whole, you could run with that. I'm not a religious expert, so I take those on the peripheral of Operation Gladio and its military framework, understanding that there's underlying motivations. For example, the guy that we're talking about in the Dignity Colony down in Chile. That guy, if you look at who his religious mentor was, it connects you to a whole nother group of cults that there's like 3 major international locations for them. They all basically practice some of the exact same things that he did. And one of them was in Los Angeles. So it's a very interesting rabbit hole. When we were looking at Waco, we did way more than we needed to in that arena. And then we note as we go through other aspects of Gladio, how they may or may not correlate to that. But that would be someone who has, a much better religious motivation or inquisitiveness. That would be an entire work to look at the ties to all of those different things and then overlay them on top of Operation Gladio. It's not something that we're ever going to do. But you can't ignore when it comes up that there are connections. So I'm just going to say that.
And the documentary I watched, it's bravo to you, because you touched a lot of the same points that they hit on with the cults. But what they were talking about specifically with the CIA was something called the Kubark Manual, which is the CIA uses for interrogation purposes. And they say that Hubbard took the Kubark Manual and created something called an e-meter reader in his religion, where it's basically the same interrogation techniques. And they touched on the stuff that you were saying about like LaVey and the Church of Satan, and also Jack Parsons, who was one of the founders of the JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory here in Pasadena. And it's very interesting how all of these guys intersected here in Los Angeles. It was like a hub for these cult leaders.
It's a very interesting, it's a very interesting conversation. Carrie?
Hey, this is a really difficult subject for me. So I have a question. I need some clarification. Did you say that the present wife of Macron was serving in Algeria, and that's connected to Operation Gladio? And the reason I ask is because with the Candace Owens thing, she is saying that he was at least groomed at 14, and that they got together as teacher and student, and they make light of that in France. That's okay. He was, she's a pedophile. That's all right. So I'm just curious whether he was like a Manchurian Candidate kind of thing. Did I get that right? She was serving in Algeria?
According to what the interview revealed, is that as a man, the person that Candace is, or the guy she was interviewing is alleging, is actually the Brigitte, because he grew up in France, had to do mandatory military service, and that he did his mandatory military service according to their records in 1963 in Algeria. And in 1963 in Algeria, it was the civil war that they were trying to overthrow the French government as colonizers in Algeria.
Right. So that could be if she or he or whatever is connected to Operation Gladio, that would make a lot of sense.
It would. But I would suggest to you, the whole time I'm watching those videos of Candace Owens, she's basically talking about Barack Obama as well. Every single one of those videos applies to Barack Obama. You can't find.
Oh my God, I didn't make that connection.
What? How could you not make that connection, Carrie? Have you not been paying attention?
I'm not you. I'm sorry.
So every single thing, all of the hidden things, there's no photos, there's no this, there's no that. Oh, and let's look at his parents. They were both his mom was CIA, working for USAID. She went to a CIA school in Hawaii. And the stepdad that supposedly raised him was part of the Operation Gladio overthrow of Sukarno and the installation of Suharto. He was a colonel in the army there that overthrew, basically working for the CIA. So he's raised by CIA parents, and he lied about everything. He said he was a foreigner in order to get into that Occidental school in California. And then none of his records are there. His birth certificate was forged, blah, blah, blah. She's telling you the story of Obama without telling you the story of Obama.
And also, too, George W. Bush, best buddies with the stepdad.
Yeah. So all along, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to pick up on something that this citizen known as Zamatoshi was pointing out, and it's kind of like I guess a sort of correlation here. He was pointing out about how, you know, you had these sub rosa goings on in Western Europe and Western and Central Europe, but at the same time you have these overt political situations, for example, with Berlusconi, and just like, it's kind of like, you know, an iceberg situation. It's like, how can we possibly correlate these kind of gladio actions that are going on kind of sub rosa with the more overt shenanigans, you know, of like parliamentary elections, changes, and it kind of, that brought to my mind is like, one of the things that makes it kind of hard to sort of make those ties that we kind of intuit are there. They have to be there. They're kind of there in the big picture, but it's hard to articulate and show, to spread this to, you know, other people, you know, without which knowing stuff is never going to matter, right? So one of the things I think that makes that it difficult is that it's hard to get a sense, you know, especially in this media environment, but earlier too, of how, for example, stuff like, whether it be the Italian legislature or whether it be in the U.S. legislature, how that changes over time, you know, because if you can't see, for example, you know, the U.S. Congress now and compare it to, say, for example, Congress in the 1970s or up until 1978 or 79 when things began to, if you can't see that kind of long-term pattern of these, you know, more above the water type part of the iceberg, that's the part that everyone is going to hear or not hear when senators talk. And if everybody is just saying like, oh, well, the senators never say anything, they're going to think that it's always been that way. Like, in fact, I mean, I know I'm going to get some pushback a little from you, Colonel, but I feel like I got to push back a little too sometimes here. I know I'm not exactly in the home court over here, but today's Democrats are just, they have not always been this paid to be quiet. They have not always been 100% Chase Manhattan and JP Morgan like they are now.
We know that.
Yeah, and it's like, so you're going to have some folks that are going to be like trying to do some stuff, and when they get stopped, that's where you have to take the note. If there's like 6 senators who are, you know, on the Senate Intelligence Committee, 8 or whatever in 1978, and 4 of them get either killed or, you know, dumped by, massively opposed by 1980, so they're no longer there. One has to note that, and it's like, it's not about heroic individuals, it's about long-term patterns in institutions that, you know, these are the above the water part of the iceberg that everyone's going to hear or everyone's going to not hear, or everyone's going to not hear. And that's kind of, in order to determine, you know, whether Congress or whether the Italian Parliament, for example, to go back to that example, to what extent did Berlusconi's media shenanigans and the deep state interactions, the gladio interactions that are, you know, so prevalent in Italian politics that you've gone into so well, to what extent did that affect, you know, changes in
all along?
Enough at times we're able to hear.
All along. The colonel's going to give the teacher, the colonel is going to give the teacher some homework. So you make an excellent
I'm
point.
not surprised with that one, Colonel.
Okay, so you make an excellent point. I need you to go back and look at the 60s and 70s on exactly what you just said. Talk to me and give me a list of the names of the people associated with oversight over the intelligence function, which at one point, I mean, I know they didn't have the intelligence committee. They had basically the foreign affairs, which supposedly collaterally had oversight over the CIA because they were operating in foreign countries. So give me a list of the people that were on those committees that attempted to speak out about the shenanigans, to include those that were on the committee that actually held the CIA responsible on the Pike and Church committee, not the ones that, like on the Waco thing, that basically just blew smoke up their butt. And then what their disposition was. Did they get reelected the first time? Did they get reelected the second time? Or were they campaigned against immediately and basically thrown out of office? Did they die like Towers did in an airplane crash? Give me some meat, because you make an excellent point. And that is exactly, I think, now is the time to make that point. Now that we're exposing all of the members of the DNI and the IRI for being the cockles that they are, and the spineless pieces of crap, if you can make the point that they are basically subjugated to the intelligence apparatus, because 30 years ago, everybody that spoke out, and obviously we know the number one guy on the list is Leo Ryan, but they spoke out, and they're either, within the next couple of years, they're assassinated. They get, overwhelmed in their primary or in a challenge to swing the seat into a different party, blah, blah, blah. Because that would be a very interesting data point, especially in light of what's being revealed right now. And I would be happy to carry that mantle. I just don't have the time to do the homework.
Yeah, Colonel, I'll be glad to do that, because it's about time I get off my ass and, put out some nouns over here. However, I mean, the book that I would recommend is, as I know I've been nagging you about it, kind of, that I know you've read the Barrett book, and it's a great book on the CIA Congress, but the book that covers this period is by the Catherine Olmsted book, published by University of North Carolina Press in '96. That book is probably the most relevant volume for our right now, especially going into these new JFK shenanigans, where the CIA, by the way, Colonel, has already pitted this up with, they calling Luna a pro-Zionist. I mean, is he pro-Zionist? Of course he is. The entire Congress is. But the point is, how they've set this up online. Okay, the Israel Did It crowd on Twitter is sending threads with like 400,000 shares, and I'm like, you compare that with Brother Elon's algorithms for like CIA Did It on JFK. It's like 400,000 to maybe 2.5 people in a wizened parakeet. Okay, it's just an op. It's clearly they've set this thing up in terms of, are you anti-Semite or not anti-Semite? They're going to do the same shit they did with CIA and, yes, Zionists. I'm not saying or Zionists. I'm saying CIA and Zionists. They're going to try to only mention Zionism, stop the whole pardon my French, stop the whole damn thing with, are you anti-Semitic or are you not? They're setting that up like a fucking lobster trap, and they're going to shut it down with, are you Z or not, or are you not Z, boys and girls? So everyone shut up, or you're anti-Semitic. It's a trap. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. So Zama, hold on. No, hold on. We don't talk out of turn. Zama, I have something I want to tell you. I asked Grok on the duplication of Le Circle and Pilgrim, and here's the 4 names: Brian Cozier,
Julian Amary, Amery. So he was a British conservative politician who was known to be part of Le Circle and had connections to the Pilgrim Society through his political and intelligence connections. Henry Kissinger was both a member of the Pilgrim Society and attended meetings of the Le Circle. Lord Carrington was a prominent member of the Pilgrim Society and affiliated with Le Circle. So there's at least 4 overlaps for you. Go ahead, Zama.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, great you've come up with those. I saw Kissinger's name come up, pop up now and again, though I don't know if he was like official or not official or just, but yeah, it's so interesting. And again, how these organizations evolve. I just wanted to maybe riff a little bit on what our friend here all along the Fair Play for Cuba was mentioning. And maybe it's just my thoughts on your comments there, sir, but really my kind of take on this, and especially maybe it's more personal in terms of conversations when I try to talk about what I this about Gladio or other conversations related to with people in general, is that there's often this kind of overt covert binary, right? Like you were saying, it's the iceberg, it's like, oh, we're talking about the CIA. It's like, yeah, is it the CIA that everyone knows and there's the building and everything, or is it the covert CIA, right? Or is it, all the sort of covert ops that happen on the side? And same goes with, I think, a lot of these other organizations, whether we're talking about the Circle, we're talking about Pilgrim Society, whether, on and on, the Bilderbergs. And I think we have to be very conscious that all these organizations are very adept at compartmentalization, right? And I think that's sort of key in trying to understand how they sort of operate, the members who are allowed in, to what level they're allowed in, and even in some of these, take the example of the P2 Lodge, right? And part of that compartmentalization, I think, comes hand in hand with the way that they manage and manipulate media. It was brought up again, why was this question, is Epstein such a big deal in the US that no one's heard of the Dutroux? Sure, there is an element of Americans maybe not being that familiar with stuff that's gone on in Europe, but be very aware that Europe has a whole nother realm of sort of media landscape and censorious regimes that do not allow certain information to get out. And the way that whole case, even when it was being prosecuted, got blanketed out, and the amount of limited hangout that was actively, sort of coordinated in not only the Belgian media, but the rest of the sort of European media. Anyone who tried to touch that with a barge pole was, talk about cancellation. I mean, you really were sort of, sent into a corner, and no one wanted to talk to you.
So, Zama,
I think there's that element of limited hangout and the way that the sort of these sort of stories go out. And just to close on that, Colonel, was, going back to the P2 Lodge, and some of the names that were revealed in the Licio Gelli list. I mean, you have Franco Di Bella, who's the director of Corriere della Sera. That's like the New York Times of Italy. It's one of the most important sort of frame setting, narrative setting newspapers of Italy since the 1800s, I think. You have Enrico Manca, who was the head of RAI, which is their national television, sort of CBS, or I don't know the equivalent. And Vito Miceli, who was also the chief of Army Intelligence.
Right.
What does that tell you?
Right.
So, the media and the way that they have been used, played, manipulated to cover for these groups, to limit hangout for these groups, and to make sure that all we know is the little dusty tops of, like, whenever we get peaks of how they appear in public, well, it's like, oh, well, they're just a nice little Catholic organization doing good things for the children over here, or here's a good little, I don't know, transatlantic organization, obviously talking about security and maybe some anti-communist stuff, but that's all you're going to hear. And so
I would agree with you
how the narrative is framed.
I would agree with you. While the Marc Dutroux saga was initially playing out. After he went to trial, to me, only because we're a member of NATO, and it was in and around NATO headquarters where all this shit took place. To me, there would have been some equivalent level of outrage at that point. And all of the research that I did into that was relying on European sources of information because you could find almost zero in the US. So I'll give you everything that you said with that exception.
That's absolutely right. I just remember when I look into it, and I'm willing to be corrected, but the Belgian media at the time was getting heavily censored, and I think it was two British journalists who came over from England and were able to at least kind of cause a big enough stink because, as you were saying, this was like NATO. These were big,
yes,
big VIPs.
But I even found like German media covering it. I found because again, it's NATO headquarters, and the implications were huge based on the people that were implicated, not just him. Although he was the only one. There was a lot of names that was associated with him that was both in the Belgian government as far as cover-ups go and blah, blah, blah. So you are right all the way up until the trial and he's convicted. And then to me, there would have been a lot more media coverage in the United States, primarily because it was in and around NATO headquarters. And not, I mean, again, I'm, during this time plugged into the whole military aspect, and I never heard of the man. I just still find that crazy. Sunshine, go ahead. We're going to have to wrap this up, guys. So let's be quick. Sunshine, go ahead.
Yeah, now we have Russia saying, yeah, okay, Americans, you guys can have Ukraine. It's all yours. You can, get your minerals. You can do whatever you want, but you will not join NATO there. Ukraine will not join NATO. So that's kind of funny that all just happened too.
Yeah. Renee, go ahead. I saw your hand up. Renee?
Hi, sorry about that. I'm multitasking at the minute.
Okay.
Okay. Where was I? Sorry. Yes, regarding the P1, as you clarified in this book earlier, there were numerous, I guess, P's, like P2 lodges. Did you say P1 was Spain, please?
Let me go back and look. Because again, this was the first book that I have ever read of multiple occurrences of them. So let's see.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of, I guess when you were in Italy doing the Operation Gladio in Italy, I was trying to research and see if there were other P's, but I couldn't find any lodges. P's.
Okay, so it says P7 is in Belgium. Where did he talk about the other ones? Hold on just a second. I thought I circled them. I've got all of this highlighted. Well, crap. P3 was Spain. P1 was France.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
sure.
Because I found over I guess it was Sunday, which was what, NATO's 70th anniversary or something? This past Sunday?
That would have been about right, yeah.
Yeah, I think I posted some cartoon about NATO and its connection to Nazi officers, etc.
Right.
And then I started down this rabbit hole. Apologies, I'm walking. As I was going down this rabbit hole of connecting former Nazis who had eventual positions in NATO, I found Condor Legion in Spain, and I never heard of the Condor Legion. I posted it in the Purple Pill earlier, but I found it really an interesting connection because we talk of Operation Condor, and I just always assumed that Condor was because the condor is a South American bird. but it may actually have connections, if you look at the article I posted, to Nazis going into Spain during the revolution to help them.
Okay.
So
I will
interesting connection, possible connection anyway.
Yeah, I definitely will look at that. That is very interesting. Because again, all of the assets that accumulated Nazi-wise in Spain eventually all make them their way to Latin America one way or the other. Even if it's not permanently, but like Otto Skorzeny makes multiple trips. Spain was the rat line to South America. So it would fit in nicely to the narrative. Obviously, the two other mentions of where the condor name came from was as it related to the bird, but I think you may be onto something, and I will definitely look at it. And thank you very much for bringing that up all along, and then we're done.
Okay, just quickly, Colonel, I know you probably, you've been mentioning like you wanted to do a longer thread or separate segment on John J. McCloy, which I heartily endorse. But also, you know, one of the key guys involved with NATO and also with some weird South American condor, especially Brazil ties, is our beloved General Vernon Walters.
Yes, he is.
And probably, I know you probably have done a thread somewhere on him, but he's everywhere. It's like Waldo won the bronze after Oswald, and General Vernon Walters took the silver in ubiquity, being everywhere at the same time. He's all over the everything, and yes. I'm just wondering if he might be worth a separate show or whatnot.
That's a good idea, and I do agree with you. He is pivotal. Yeah, that's a great idea. Let me look into that. He probably is worth his own special recognition. I mean, he's almost as good as William Pauly. I don't think anybody's going to touch William Pauly, but Vernon Walters may be almost as good as him. Thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for participating. We've got 2 homework, Vernon Walters and the article on Condor, and then all along has his own assignment. I love it. All right, guys. I will see you tomorrow, and I will be on the Missing Link show tonight. I'm just looking up the time real quick. 9:00. I'll send out that advertisement again here shortly. But thanks again for being here. Appreciate it. Take care. All right. Let's get over here and see if we got anything else on Rumble. Please hit the thumbs up. SR71's on it. If you guys are not subscribed to the Rumble channel and you just like follow me, please subscribe. It definitely helps. I really appreciate that. Also, stuff on X tells me the recent happenings are confusing many people. Yeah, I bet. Because they don't have their Gladio glasses on. Let's see. Good morning, all from Australia. All right. Glad to have our Aussie buddies in here. Minnesota Patriot. I am having an awesome day. Thank you for asking. Let's see. All right. What's needed is a Gladio board like the Data Republican. It really is. And if we knew somebody that was IT literate, and it's not going to be me, it would be awesome because they could take the books that I have, because I circle the names and the names of the companies, and they could put little blurbs by each one of them, and we could have one of those brain maps. I started it. It's just too cumbersome for me to do. And my brain just goes, what? But anyway, for now, it's just in my head. Take care, guys. I will see you tomorrow. Thanks for being here.